fans began comparing Carrey's latest photos with older interviews. One detail that sparked the biggest debate: his eyes.
Something strange has been happening with Jim Carrey. At certain appearances, fans swear he looks like a completely different person, sometimes even a different body. Online theories have exploded, from secret Hollywood experiments to rumors of cloning. But two people who know Jim Carrey better than most, Keanu Reeves and Jeff Daniels, have hinted that something unusual really did happen behind the scenes. So what exactly happened at the Cesar Awards, and why are people suddenly questioning the real Jim Carrey? Join us as we uncover the truth behind the new Jim Carrey. The appearance discrepancy. Over the course of the 21st century and since the dawn of cutting-edge technology, plastic surgeries have become as popular as ambient lighting in the Hollywood scene. Even the rebranding trend has been a staple for superstars to feed on in recent times. It is never a surprise when a celebrity comes on stage with new physical features or persona. It is always seen as trends of and innovation. But not in the case of Jim Carrey. Jim's case was treated with raised eyebrows. Recently, Jim Carrey made an appearance at the Cesar Awards show in Paris to receive a Lifetime Achievement Award. This should have been a big moment where the media would be all over his accomplishments and maybe even talk about his wardrobe. Knowing the type of mouth he had, it was also expected that the headlines after that event would be filled with captions the funny actor had produced. However, the internet went crazy with people saying he looked different, not in the came down with a cold type of way, and definitely not in the makeup malfunction type of way. He looked way different than usual. This conversation was the #1 topic on the list of trending things about that day in France. As soon as Jim Carrey stepped on the carpet and received flashes from the camera, there were raised eyebrows. Who were they really looking at? The real internet uproar took place when he stepped on stage to claim the award. While giving the interview and speech, more people started catching on to what the media team had just noticed. It all looked different, right? Is that really Jim? Why did he do that to his face? Is this some kind of PR stunt? Amidst the claps to commemorate him were murmurs questioning his fidelity. Folks immediately started comparing footage from his last public appearance in late 2025. This was when he inducted Soundgarden into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. They put the new and old photos side by side and continued asking questions about the Cesar Awards appearance. There was an obvious difference, but plenty of people still chose to doubt. A particular faction even tweeted in his support, calling it a combination of face fat and makeup malfunction. This all happened during his award show, but it didn't stop there. On his way out when signing autographs, more question marks appeared. The news had already spread like wildfire, and whilst a few streamers and journalists tried pitching in questions, he just nonchalantly ignored them and continued signing autographs before leaving. Silence wasn't the appropriate answer here, as it only raised more eyebrows. Everybody there knew that was very unlike Jim Carrey. The usual Jim Carrey wouldn't do that. The Jim Carrey of not too long ago would rather answer with something quirky or give a soft smile rather than completely ignore. Conspiracy theorists picked this up. Surely something like this was not going to pass them by. They started analyzing every frame of the footage and noticed how his face wasn't the only thing that was distorted. They pointed out how his shape was slightly off from what it used to be, and how his posture still felt new, like in those fantasy movies where a magician was still learning how to control a new doll. It was all off. What were the hospital records like? What were his close friends saying? Who had been in contact with him for the past few months? The nosy digging common in the internet era started. Cults breathing down his neck. This digging led to them discovering something more sinister. It was looking way over the line from just a personal decision to undergo surgery. It felt like external hands were at play here. Keanu Reeves and Jim were colleagues who had met on various sets and in various gatherings. It wasn't lost on him how much the allegations had grown. He was being asked about Jim in almost every interview, but chose to avoid the topic every time. He had no say in the matter, and saw himself as someone who didn't want to be the one to feed the media more speculative fodder on a fellow performer of art. That was until recently. Recently, Keanu got into an interview about his upcoming cartoon release with Jim. Here, they delivered voice acting performances for the hero and villain respectively in the 3rd edition of Sonic the Hedgehog.
I will have my revenge.
Well, when I heard that Keanu Reeves wanted to play Shadow, I said, oh.
Everybody was visibly worried about the dissonance displayed by Jim despite a big event coming up. It was one of the main topics in the interview. Keanu, who usually showed reluctance to speak on this matter, now seemed eager. He was visibly worried and hoped a solution could be arrived at fast. Here, he recalled a few conversations they had when they were working together on Sonic the Hedgehog 3. They spent a lot of time in the recording booth. And what Keanu learned from Jim during those sessions changed how he saw this industry forever. Jim Carrey told him about the pressure the industry giants have been putting on him for years, not just to come back and make movies, but to become someone he's not anymore. When he asked Jim to go deeper or to explain less vaguely, Jim would just wave it off and label it as an expensive joke. Sometimes, he would tell Keanu not to worry, that it was just an acting performance for a secret role he had coming up. The first time Keanu really noticed something was off was when Jim showed up to one of the movie's recording sessions with all sorts of shakiness written all over him. Keanu has been in this business for a long time. He had worked with a lot of people and seen actors fade away. He had played multiple roles and knew what type of character he was looking at. What he saw in Jim's eyes that day wasn't burnout. It was fear. Fear of something way worse than fatigue or underperformance. Jim pulled him aside after they finished recording a scene and spoke to him quietly. "Keanu, you don't understand what they're trying to do to me." Keanu asked him who they were, and he just shook his head. Now, Keanu had heard a lot of crazy things in Hollywood. People talk about conspiracies all the time, but this was different. He would reassure him and tell him it's okay before offering him a drink. Jim would often refuse before he would reluctantly go ahead to accept, then take a little sip. Keanu would then ask him random questions about his day, and he recalled them being just basic things anybody did. Over the next few weeks, Jim started opening up more. He told Keanu about this hidden information he had been gathering. He claimed that if even half of this is true, then there are some very powerful people in the industry who would have a lot to lose if the information got out. He says these people have been putting enormous pressure on him to stay silent. They wanted him to stay hidden, but he wasn't exactly the type to afford to live in seclusion. And since things weren't going exactly according to plan, they were now threatening him. Randy Quaid, a veteran of the industry who was listening, had his own theories about these ongoing things. He claims that Jim was targeted for elimination due to his knowledge of the dark practices involving the passing of David Carradine and Heath Ledger. Randy Quaid says a lot of things, and not all of them are exactly proven or popular facts, but when someone with his experience makes a statement like that, people listen. On Randy's social media post on the topic, a person commented talking about how it was typical for the real Jim Carrey to come up with something quirky like that just for the plot on a random Thursday. Others were just paranoid if they really took him out. Looking at all the evidence people were pointing to, it gets kind of hard to just dismiss everything as fans being crazy, especially when the evidence is right there for all to see, plastered on his body, visible in plain sight. More physical and behavioral evidence. A few weird changes of note have been observed in Jim's lifestyle. Whether it's just a phase or not remains unclear to the public. At this point, a few were getting tired of asking the same where and how questions about the superstar. They felt like the old saying that the truth would always reveal itself would not shy away in this situation. Maybe if they stopped asking questions, Jim himself would come out to speak. Or so they thought. He was caught by paparazzi and a few fans outside an unusual hotel once. Apparently, a dozen-plus photographers all received the same anonymous tip that Jim Carrey was going to come out of a random hotel on the outskirts of town at a particular time on a random afternoon. When he appeared, he came out dressed in stay-at-home clothes with his hair looking ruffled and unkempt. Even though the paparazzi hid themselves so well before swarming him, he showed no visible sign of perplexity. He just kept his face buried to the ground and attempted to walk past. They swarmed him at the corner of the road again. This time, a few passers-by helped, as everybody had an agenda or two to see Jim. That's true or not? Please, give answer. After Epstein files, you are actually say something that's same or not. Are you true? You same man? An Asian reporter asked as he held a small microphone to Jim's face. As the crowd showed no sign of moving, and as Jim showed no sign of talking, he later settled for autographs. He brought out a pen from the left breast of his jacket. Before this encounter, the internet believed Jim was extremely left-handed. On this day, however, he was seen signing autographs with his right hand. Question marks stood firm in the conspiracist's office.
Jim, come on. I'm signing Frank Sinatra. You don't mind that?
A video from an outing in 2014 immediately went up on social media. In the video, he was there, his usual self, making jokes, mouth wide and pen in left hand, signing autographs to fans outside a movie premiere. The captions in the videos circulating were asking, how? It didn't stop there. After all, it was the first time they were seeing him in the daytime in so long. They started micro-analyzing his appearance, and it wasn't long until they picked up another bomb. Up until recently, it was just conversations about his facial muscles, hypertrophy, posture, and behavioral mannerisms. But now they've noticed two things. One couldn't just change by drugs and surgery. First, the dexterity change, and now the color of his eyes. It wasn't as easy to change eye color, but somehow Jim had managed to. He changed the way the eyes were completely. Even the shape was different. Observers and surgeons have noted a more hollow, arched, and at times puffy appearance in his eye area, suggesting potential, recent, and perhaps overcorrected plastic surgery.
Jim Carrey recently won an award in Paris as about his appearance. Did he have a bunch of plastic surgery?
The changes are so distinct that some have questioned whether they are the result of procedures like a brow lift or if the individual in recent sightings is a doppelganger. The change in eye color saw it go from brown to a lighter gray-like shade. What was really happening? In real life, he was a shadow of his former self. And now, his social media too. All his socials faced one thing or the other. Either they were deactivated or rendered completely inactive. Talk less of making posts, he didn't even bother to like or view the updates of others. Like a ghost, non-existent. The reason why this was so weird and unlike others was because of how contradictory it was to who he really was. His longtime friend, Jeff Daniels, had a lot to say about this. Origin story / philosophical shift. Jeff Daniels joined Keanu in speaking on this regress seen in Jim. He, however, didn't have anything to say about the conspiracies. He was a longtime friend who knew Jim from their old-time role together.
You'll have to excuse my friend. He's a little slow.
He knew a lot about who Jim was from the inside out, and knew more than everybody how absurd this attitude was becoming. The day Jim turned 16, he dropped out of school. It was because his family had gone into debt and had nowhere to turn to next. Because of this, Jim and his siblings were all forced to get jobs to fend for themselves at a relatively young age. Only a few types were available, and they saw themselves go out daily, in uniforms, to work as either security guards or janitors. At some point, he was living in a Volkswagen van and sleeping inside a tent. His dad lost his job as an accountant when he was 12, and they couldn't make enough money to keep the family stable. During this time, Jim Carrey performed 8-hour shifts as a janitor and security guard at a tire factory. This time helped him create a deep-seated awareness of the divide between the working class and the ruling elite in him. Young Jim Carrey wanted to do stand-up comedy.
Well, I guess we're gonna have ourselves a nuclear holocaust.
He had this big dream of making people laugh, so he went to this club called Yuck Yucks in Toronto to perform. But the crowd hated it so much that the club literally played Crucify Him over the speakers to boo him off the stage. Most people would have quit after experiencing something like that, but Jim Carrey kept going while facing years of rejection. He auditioned for Saturday Night Live 3 separate times between 1980 and 1986, and every single time they said no. Not only that, but he had this sitcom called The Duck Factory in 1983. It was his first real shot at television success. And what happened? It failed badly. And not only did it fail, but it aired out of order, which basically meant nobody even saw it properly. Then there's the story about The Tonight Show. They invited Jim to perform, and then they revoked the invitation after he did a lackluster set at some club. He always wanted to focus on what he believed in, because he wanted to give the world the real thing. He wanted them to see the real him. All of these struggles made Jim Carrey appreciate success more when it finally arrived in 1994. In one calendar year, this guy released 3 blockbuster movies: Ace Ventura, The Mask, and Dumb and Dumber. Every single one of them was a massive hit, and it made him a household name. He went from being the guy who couldn't get hired to the biggest movie star on the planet. He was seen as many things: infantile, gleefully uninhibited. All these things that make him a rarity still couldn't outshine the fact that he was now a bankable Hollywood star, commanding $25 million per picture. After years of struggle, Jeff says that Jim knew people thought this would be the happiest time of his life. However, Jim started to realize that this success hadn't actually filled the void he was trying to fill. He talked about this concept all the time, a concept that he calls the lie. And basically, what it means is that all his life he thought that if he became successful, famous, then he would finally feel worth something. But when he actually got there and had everything he thought he wanted, he realized it was all empty. He was never going to take it for granted, but at the same time, he didn't feel seen by his fame. The fame didn't love him back, the money was just paper, and the attention was just noise. And this is where his real philosophy really started to shift. He began to see himself, Jim Carrey, as just a character, and started thinking that maybe his purpose wasn't to become a star, but to use his star power to free people from their concerns, make them laugh, and forget about their problems for a couple of hours. Then came the movie, Man on the Moon, and this is when things got really intense. Jim Carrey went all in on this role. He became Andy Kaufman in a way that he started to blur the lines between himself and the character. Jeff recalled him talking about hosting a party for all the unwanted toys that just sit up on the shelf all day with no one to play with when he gets the speakers fixed. After Man on the Moon, Jim was never really the same. He had achieved every dream he ever had, and instead of feeling fulfilled, he felt more lost than ever. The crown he had been chasing turned out to be hollow, and that emptiness led Jim down a very strange path, one that would eventually put him at odds with the entire industry. A man versus Hollywood. In 2014, Jim Carrey went on the Jimmy Kimmel Live show and pulled a legendary stunt. He basically did this whole satirical bit where he exposed Hollywood's secret societies. He demonstrated an all-mocking tongue gesture and claimed that talk show hosts,
human being with a huge heart that everybody's trying to protect, and lightning hits his life,
are basically government-hired mouthpieces. In 2017, things got messier when Jim Carrey was at Fashion Week in New York. There, he told this reporter that he is not real, and people should stop referring to him as an icon. He dismissed the whole concept of icons, calling them the lowest form of ambition, and then he dropped a few more lines attacking those in Hollywood. During the Oscar slap incident, where Will Smith walked up on stage and slapped Chris Rock, the whole world lost its mind. Everyone in Hollywood was trying to figure out what to say, how to react. Most people were very diplomatic and were trying not to step on toes, and that moment was exactly when Jim Carrey came out and decided to call Hollywood spineless. He said he felt sickened by the standing ovations. He felt like Hollywood was just a spineless mass of famous people, and to him that didn't feel cool. He didn't want to be part of an uncool group. This statement really summed up where Jim's mindset was at that point. He was done playing the game. He was done pretending, and it was only a matter of time before he made a decision. Later on in 2022, Jim Carrey announced that he was walking away from acting altogether. To him, it felt like the final chapter and a good time to park the bus. He had been building up to this exit for years and had made his peace with fame being empty, Hollywood being corrupt, and the whole thing being artificial. Although he decided to retire in 2022, his chapter wasn't closed up. He would later return to the cinema, and that is when his whole act would be figured out. The conclusion of his chapter. Despite his reclusive stance, in 2024, Jim Carrey came back to voice a character in Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and was casted alongside Keanu Reeves, who was voicing Shadow. The word spreading through certain circles is that Keanu allegedly believes the person the audience saw stumbling through that prestigious event was not the real Jim Carrey at all. It was either a clone, an elaborate body double, or some kind of industry-controlled puppet designed to mimic the legendary funny man's presence. According to him, the real Jim Carrey knew too much about the industry giants. He had been getting very close to exposing the dark side of Hollywood, specifically making some very troubling connections regarding the recent Epstein files drop. Jim Carrey had information that went even further than what was already public. He had evidence that certain powerful figures had been involved in activities that would make headlines around the world. And he was about to do that in the Paris award show before he was unalived, allegedly. They couldn't control the real Jim Carrey, so instead of trying to manage him any longer, they simply created a replacement, a docile version that looks like Jim, that sounds somewhat like Jim, and that can be controlled completely, unlike Jim. This alleged clone doesn't question authority. This clone doesn't expose secrets. This clone just smiles for the cameras and collects paychecks, exactly what the industry elites demand. What do you guys think about Jim Carrey's new clone theory? Do you believe something bad is happening behind the scenes in Hollywood? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.